950. Daf Yomi. Tractate Makot. Tractate Makot, page 19. Makos Yutes, which has a gematria value of 485. Makos Yutes equals 485, which equals Min Shemayim, and it also equals Ta'ut. Ta'ut means a mistake, and sometimes we make a mistake and we think, we sometimes we're inclined to blame ourselves, but if we think that Ta'ut, mistake, equals Min Shemayim, that really, even if we make a mistake, it's still ultimately part of the plan, and we won't be so hard on ourselves. Makos 19. A, top of the page, the word Me'ematai chayven lehem mishirao pnei habayis keman ki haytana ditanya Rabbi Eliezer Omer bekurim mikzatan bachutz ומקצתן בפנים שבחוץ הרי הן כחולין לכל דבריהם שבפנים הרי הן כהקדש לכל דבריהם. From when is a non-priest who eats first fruits liable to receive death at the hands of heaven for their consumption? One is liable from when the fruits will enter inside the temple. The Gemara notes, in accordance with whose opinion is this halacha stated. It is in accordance with the opinion of this Tana, as it is taught in a Braita that Rabbi Eliezer says, with regard to first fruits, some of which are outside and some of which are inside the temple, the halachic status of those that are outside the temple is like that of non-sacred produce for all matters concerning them, and the halachic status of those that are inside the temple is like that of consecrated produce for all matters concerning them. Amar Rav Sheshes, Bikuri manocha mekeves bohen, kriyo ein makeves bohen. Rav Sheshes says, with regard to first fruits, the lack of placement alongside the altar invalidates them, while the lack of recitation of the accompanying Torah verses does not invalidate them. Keman ki haytana ditanya Rabbi Yossi Omer shlosha devarim mishum shlosha zikenim Rabbi Yishmael Omer yochol ya'ale adam aser sheni bizman hazeh b'Yerushalayim yochlenu v'dinu bechor ta'un havat makom ma'aser sheni ta'un havat makom ma bechor eno ela בפני הבית, אך מעשר אינו אלא בפני הבית. The Gemara notes, in accordance with whose opinion is this halacha stated. It is in accordance with the opinion of this Tana, Rabbi Yishmael, as it is taught in a Braita that Rabbi Yossi says three statements in the name of three elders, and one of those statements is that which Rabbi Yishmael says, one might have thought that a person would bring second tithe produce up to Jerusalem in the present, after the destruction of the temple, and eat it. And ostensibly it could be derived by means of a logical inference that one may not do so. A firstborn offering requires bringing it to the place, to Jerusalem, eating it there, and second tithe produce requires bringing it to the place, just as the firstborn offering may be eaten there only in the presence of the temple. So too, second tithe produce may be eaten there only in the presence of the temple. Ma lebechor shekein ta'un matan damim ואמורים לגבי מזבח ביקורים יוכיחו מה לביקורים שכן טעונים הלכה. Rabbi Yishmael continues and counters what is notable about a firstborn Bringing the firstborn to Jerusalem is required only in the presence of the temple, because it is notable in that it requires placement of its blood and its sacrificial portions upon the altar. Will you say the same with regard to second tithe produce, which requires only that it be consumed in Jerusalem? He then suggests first fruits will prove that placement of blood upon the altar is not a factor, as they do not require placement of blood upon the altar, and yet they are brought to Jerusalem only in the presence of the temple. Rabbi Yishmael counters, what is notable about first fruits? They are notable in that they require placement alongside the altar. Perhaps since second tithe produce does not require placement at all, even in the present, one must bring it to Jerusalem and eat it there. Talmud lomar v'achalta sham lifnei Adonai Elohecha makish ma'asel bechol ma bechol eino ela lifnei habayis ach ma'asa eino ela lifnei habayis v'im isa lifroch ma lebikurim she'itunin chiyam enochel. Rabbi Yishmael concludes, therefore the verse states, and you shall eat before the Lord your God the tithe of your grain and the firstborn of your herd and your flock, Deuteronomy 14:23. The Torah juxtaposes second tithe produce to the firstborn. Just as the firstborn may be eaten there only in the presence of the temple, so too second tithe produce may be eaten there only in the presence of the temple. The Gemara explains the proof of Rav Shesh's opinion from the Braita is, and if it is so that the lack of recitation of the Torah verses invalidates the ritual of first fruits, let the Braita refute the derivation by saying, what is notable about first fruits? They are notable in that they require recitation of the Torah verses and placement alongside the altar. Amavashi nihi dikovaleka mitzvah mileka velema mitzvah levefoich el amavashi kevandika begoy agel diboy lebema shanidba Hashem lavoisenu v'lo emotzi alma v'lo psikate. Rav Ashi said, there is no proof from the fact that recitation is not mentioned. Although the lack of recitation does not invalidate the first fruits, is there no mitzvah? Everyone agrees that there is a mitzvah to recite the Torah verses, and therefore let the Tana say that there is a mitzvah to recite the portion, and refute the proof from first fruits in that manner. As in the case of second tithe, there is no mitzvah to recite Torah verses. Rather, Rav Ashi said that there is a different reason that recitation was omitted from the refutation. It is that there is the case of the first fruits of a convert who needs to recite, I have come to the land that the Lord swore unto our fathers, Deuteronomy 26 verse 3. And since he cannot say it, as the Lord did not swear to give the land to the ancestors of the convert, he brings the first fruits but does not read the portion. Therefore, the obligation to recite the Torah verses is not clear-cut for the Tana, and he did not mention it. The Gemara asks, why was it necessary for the Tana to derive that second tithe produce is not brought to Jerusalem at present from the juxtaposition of the verse, and let the derivation revert to its starting point, and derive the halacha through an analogy derived from the common factor of first fruits and the firstborn. Each of the sources neutralizes the significance of the notable factor in the other, Leaving the common factor, one must bring them to Jerusalem. From there it may be derived that second tithe produce, which one must also bring to Jerusalem, need not be brought there when the temple is not standing. The Gemara answers, the juxtaposition is necessary due to the fact that this analogy can be refuted. What is notable about the common factor is that is true of both first fruits and firstborn. It is notable in that they have an aspect of involving the altar, which is not so in the case of second tithe. Umay kasar, I kasar kedusha rishoina kedusha l'shanta v'kedusha d'alsi lavoi. Chonami kasar kedusha rishoina kedusha lavoi. Afil chonami moyim. The Gemara asks, and what opinion does Rabbi Ishmael hold that led to his initial assumption that one is obligated to bring a firstborn animal to Jerusalem only when the temple is standing, if he maintains in general that the initial consecration of the temple sanctified Jerusalem for its time and sanctified Jerusalem forever, and the location of the temple remains sacred even after the temple was destroyed, then one should also be obligated to bring a firstborn animal to the place of the temple and sacrifice it on an altar and eat it. If he maintains that the initial consecration of the temple sanctified Jerusalem for its time, but did not sanctify Jerusalem forever, then he should raise a dilemma even with regard to a firstborn, whether it may be eaten in Jerusalem. Amar Rabino, Le'oilam basaro kitchel sha'ato, velo kitchel hasidavoi, v'hacha bebechor shenizrak damo, kodem churban habayit, v'charav habayit, v'adayin b'saro kayam. Umakshinan b'saro lidamo, ma damo b'mizbeach, af b'saro b'mizbeach, umakish ma'aser b'chor. Ravina said, actually, Rabbi Ishmael maintains that the initial consecration of the temple sanctified Jerusalem for its time, but did not sanctify Jerusalem forever. And why is it obvious to him that the firstborn is not eaten? It is because here he is stating the halacha with regard to the case of a firstborn whose blood was sprinkled before the destruction of the temple, and the temple was then destroyed, and its flesh is still intact. And, based on a juxtaposition, you shall sprinkle their blood upon the altar, and their flesh shall be for you. Numbers 18:17-18. We compare the status of its flesh to the status of its blood, just as its blood must be sprinkled at a time when the altar is standing, so to its flesh may be eaten only at a time when the altar is standing. And he compares the status of the second tithe produce to the status of a firstborn offering, and derives that one may partake of second tithe produce in Jerusalem only when the temple is standing. The Gemara asks, and does a matter derived via juxtaposition then teach another matter via juxtaposition? The principle with regard to the halachot of consecrated matters is that a halacha derived via one of the hermeneutical principles cannot serve as the basis for derivation of another halacha. Each halacha requires its own source. The Gemara answers, second tithe of grain is non-sacred produce, and halachot of non-sacred matters derived via hermeneutical principles may serve as the basis for deriving other halachot using hermeneutical principles.